Hello everyone. So, who needs to solve climate change? Lately, so far, it's mostly been people who are buying EVs, putting solar panels on their roofs, but the biggest action, or better said, inaction, comes from governments around the world, and they really need to be held accountable. So what can an individual or a group of individuals do about this? Now, obviously, I guess you could vote for better leaders, but so far for climate change, that hasn't had much effect yet. Or, in the case of Marian Minnesma, the founder of an organization called Urgenda, which stands for Urgent Agenda, they sued the government, and on December 20th, 2019, yesterday, they won the definitive final round. This has been a 12-year-long ongoing battle. It started in the lower courts, then went through the Court of Appeals, and now came out the final decision of the Supreme Court, and the Dutch government lost. This may be the first example on climate change where the people sued the government and won. Miriam actually gave a speech at Climate Launchpad 2019 in November, and we were actually lucky enough to get a short interview in as well. Her speech is one of the most inspiring climate action speeches I have ever seen so far, so shortening, it was quite actually a painful experience since there is just so much good stuff in there. So in this version we will start out with her speech, which we shortened to 15 minutes. The whole thing is like half an hour, but don't worry, in this version we still managed to keep in all the good bits. And after that we have our interview with her. In any case, enjoy watching.
So from all the ideas we had from this new field in science, we started an urgent agenda. In the first place, it was not an organization yet. We just invented what should change to make the Netherlands sustainably. And then we had a big event organized with hundreds of people, and we asked them, what will the Netherlands look like in 2050? So there were many artists and so on, and a lot of scientists. And in the end, we had this urgent agenda and said, well, this is what we think needs to be done in the next, at that time, about 40 years. And that was on the first page of our national best newspaper, and then thousands of people came in and said, wow, what a great idea, are you going to carry out this urgent agenda? And then we felt a bit obliged, so we made it the foundation Urgenda, and that's how we started. So in 2012 we started with hundreds of professors and all institutes in the Netherlands for my main question: if we really want to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, what do we need to do? Can we still do it in time? Because if we really want to stay with below 1.5 degrees, you actually have to stop emitting in 2030 and not in 2050. And that's a big difference. But if we go on until 2050, there is enough CO2 in the air to come close to 3 degrees, and then the politicians count on you to get the CO2 out of the air. But if you want to go a half a degree lower, you need pretty much all the agricultural land in the world to fill with trees, and then you go a half a degree lower. So I don't think that that is very feasible, and we'd better stop emitting now instead of counting on you for an impossible task. So we made this book with all those people and showed that it is possible to have 100% renewable energy in 2030. The first version started in 2012. Then we had 18 years, so it sounded like a little bit of feasible. Now it's 2019, and I finished the last version this year, which is the one over there. And of course I thought, shall I make it 2035? Because it's now only 11 years. But I know if you make it 35, that we will not reach the 1.5 degrees. So what we actually need is a kind of combination of Kennedy and Roosevelt. Kennedy said, we want to be on the moon in 10 years. I don't have the metals yet, I don't know the computer system yet, but I do want it. And 8 years later, we were there. And Roosevelt in the war, who said, well, you now make cars, but I want you to make airplanes. And 3 years later, they made airplanes. Well, I want a combination of those two men, and then in the form of female, and then we can make it. So, we are not yet close, but we still go for it. And what we do in the Netherlands is we have programs on all the topics that we need to do. So we should make all houses energy neutral. We should drive electric. We should have our greenhouses on deep geothermal energy. We should change the industry and then have lots of solar panels, wind turbines, and geothermal energy and a few others. So there's quite a big program. But the funny thing is, when I started with the first book, people said, well, big vehicles cannot go on hydrogen or anything else, that should be bioenergy. And I could talk and ask them, no, I don't want bioenergy, can't we invent something else before 2030, come on. And they all the specialists said, no, that's not going to happen. And 5 years later, with the third book, they all had changed and said, no, of course, there are lorries electric, we already have an electric tractor, so before 2030, it will all be electric. But it changed within 5 years. And in 2012, they allowed me only to use 3 megawatt wind turbines, and the first of 12 megawatt is already there. So things change much quicker than people think. And what I found out is that specialists cannot really think like this. Specialists think linear. They cannot think that it goes quicker than they knew it would go. And even if you point them out, look, last time you thought it would go like this and it went like that, shall you not change then now? They can't. No, usually it is possible. Well, then we thought, are we moving quickly enough? And the conclusion was no. Our government is always talking a lot, so many people think that the Netherlands are frontrunners. We are not, specifically not on climate and energy. So I had read this book, and that said, well, we need to do something which is still democratic, but the government won't do it. The problem is serious, and the only thing left over is actually the legal system. If we will put to the judges the problem of climate change, they will clearly say this is a very big threat. And then you have, as a government, a duty of care to protect your citizens. That's the basic thing. And we thought, okay, let's try this. And everybody, or even our friends, said, this is impossible. Marianne, you've done a lot of funny things, but this is really stupid. And I said, okay, fine, but I'm still going to do it. And I think it's good to realize that the Netherlands is the lowest, only Luxembourg is lower on renewable energy in Europe. And this was when we started in 2012, and it's still the same case. It's only now 8% instead of 6%. So when we wrote our government a letter, please, will you do what you have said yourself is necessary, which means between the 25 and 40% reduction in 2020 of greenhouse gases. We received a letter back, and the government said, Mrs. Minsma, you're very right. Climate change is a very big problem. We acknowledge that. But we don't want to be a frontrunner. And if you then know that they are the laggard of Europe, that's very funny. And I think that most people don't realize that we are not small at all. If you have roughly 200 countries in the world, in absolute terms, we are number 34 in the world in emitting greenhouse gases. So this is a picture where you here see, well, the biggest emitters are China and America, but we are here. We are one of the biggest emitters in the world. So we are not small. But I think your absolute emissions are not so relevant, because of course China is the biggest emitter. They also have more than 1 billion people. We only have 17 million. And it's more fair to look at the emissions per capita, the emissions per person. And if you do that, then you will see that the Netherlands is in the top 10. And we emit a lot more per person than China does, and a lot more than India does. So we are amongst the biggest emitters in the world. And if we want to keep our feet dry, we have to ask all the other countries in the world, please stop emitting. Well, how can you ask China and India to stop emitting if we are amongst the biggest in the world? And I think that that's not fair, and it's also not something I would dare to do if we not first do our own job. And that's the reason why Urgenda focuses on the Netherlands, and we're not telling other people what to do. So we invented something new. You have crowdfunding, of course, but we thought cloud pleading is nice. We ask everybody in the Netherlands, do you want to join us? Do you have any good argument? Do you know of any legal case in the world that we could use? And do you want to be a co-plaintiff? Then join us. It doesn't cost you any money, but we want to go to court on behalf of many other people. And we had thousands of reactions, a lot of people that had nice ideas. And in 2013, we handed in the summons together with hundreds of people and a lot of young people to the court. And the heart of our case is simple civil tort law. We said if a government doesn't do enough, it's an unlawful act because you have a duty of care to protect your citizens. And a lot of people said, well, it's not possible because environmental law is like the Climate Change Convention is international law and you cannot use international law. But that was not what we were doing. We said this duty of care is an open norm, and the open norm you can color with what the Dutch government has said everywhere in the world. And we have said we are an industrial country, so we need to reduce our greenhouse gases between 25 and 40% in 2020. And we have written that in numerous documents, so it's clear that we have acknowledged that. So is there a breach of this duty of care? And we thought that was true, but we have had to convince first the judges is a serious problem, really serious problem, because otherwise you can never win it. Well, if you look at the amount of CO2 in the air, it has been for 800,000 years between 180 and 280 parts per million. So that's something that we are very used to and in which we thrive as human beings. But we're now at 415. Since the Industrial Revolution, it was enormous, speeded up. And the last time we were there was 3 million years ago. And then the sea level was tens of meters higher. There was no North Pole, and it was not a nice atmosphere for us to live in. So very clear something is happening. And you see that from 270 to 280 parts per million took us 5,000 years. But from 410 to 415, we did in 2 years. So it's speeding up. And we seem not to acknowledge this. Well, you see the temperature going up, very clear, of course. And you see the results. And the scientists, for a very long period, thought the big ice sheets, there's a lot of sun coming there, so many watts per square meter, so it will take very long time before it melts. But they forgot that a lot of the heat ended up in the ocean. More than 80% of all the heat is in the ocean. And from below, there was also melting of the ice. So it went much, much quicker than expected. And you see that this is going steeper and steeper, which means that it's going higher in a quicker pace. And in the Netherlands, it's extremely relevant that half of our country is below sea level. So we had a committee 10 years ago which had to invent how much do we need to build up our dikes the next 100 years. We are the only country in the world that plans 100 years in advance for building dikes. And the committee said 10 years ago, well, the worst case scenario is 1.20 meters higher sea levels in 2100. And then there was a lot of people that said, oh, that's exaggerating, you're an activist, blah, blah, blah. And that was a scientific committee. And we're now 10 years later, and our main institute says it could be now 2.5 to 3 meters in 2100. So the worst case went within 10 years from 1.20 meters to 2.5 to 3. And this is not the main news, whereas for our country it's extremely relevant. And you can see here that if the Netherlands... If the sea level is a bit higher, then half of our country is gone. And now our main institutes are making all kinds of scenarios of what we need to do. Shall we build up and live on a kind of bigger areas, or shall we have an enormous low-level country with enormous dikes? Well, if it goes in this pace, they are not sure whether they will be able to do that quickly enough. So you could say to the judge, there is an emergency situation. You see that things are changing much quicker than we expected. And for the Netherlands, as a low-level country, this really means a duty of care for your government. And we don't think that adaptation will be quickly enough. So we need to find other ways. So the judges agreed. And on the 21st of June 2015, that was before the Paris Convention, they acknowledged that we were right. And nobody had expected it, and within half an hour it was all over the world. We got phone calls from Canada to New Zealand, crying people on the phone like, oh, I did not expect that it would work, and now I have hope again, and I've worked for 30 years in climate change, and I had given up, but now I go on. And that aspect of hope was very special, because we did not expect it, and we didn't expect at all that it would travel the world so quickly, because these judges made the verdict in Dutch and English. And they put it on the website at the same time. So it traveled very, very quickly. And just to show what we have asked, in 2015, we asked for 25% reduction in 2020. The Dutch government wants 49% in 2030. So what we want is exactly on their track. So we don't ask for anything special. We just ask, do what you have promised. And they are not close to their own track. So we are not asking something extremely high. Well, then they went to the Court of Appeal, and on the 9th of October last year, the Court of Appeal said, Urgenda is right too. And that was really a blow in the face of the government, because the first time they thought this was district court, made a mistake, but we simply go on and we ignore it. But then the second court said, well, it's not only because of you have an unlawful act because of tort law, but it's also unlawful because of human rights. So you have now a duty of care based on two different legs, you could say. One is civil Dutch law and one is international European human rights law. So we have two duties of care now, and they said, well, you should simply do what's necessary and you should take your precautionary measures. And the government had 29 grounds of appeal, and they were all slashed. They appealed again. And before that, there is a final verdict, which is on the 20th of December. Our main court always gets advice from a very high independent board. And this independent board, a few weeks ago, said Urgenda is right too. So we have now more or less won 3 times. And on the 20th of December, they might need to reduce 25% next year. And at the moment, they are at 15%. So this will be another crisis in our ministry. But we are from Solutions. So what we did when it was the 4th birthday of our court case, the 24th of June 2019, we went to The Hague with 700 organizations and we handed over a plan how they could still reach 25% in 2020. And all those 700 organizations also want to help to do this. And those plans are very different, from driving a bit slower or making the water level a bit higher to all kinds of technical solutions and innovations, but all things that you can still do within 1.5 years, and by now 1 year and a few months. So we are now actually making the 50 measures plan because we see they're not acting, and we want to show to the court it is still possible. You can let us win because it is still possible. So we inspired many. The Belgium started the court case. They have now quarreled for 3 years about whether it should be in Dutch or in French. So they are a bit late. The French had very many big actors and so on that started an action that was called Notre Affaire à Tout. And they had 2 million signatures of people that supported their court case within a very short time. And this is also not very nice for Macron, that also France has started now a court case in Germany, and so on and so on. So my message to you would be, we don't have until 2050. I know there's lots of inventions here that could help to make the change quicker. We really need to do it within 10 to 15 years and not in 30 years. And I hope that you will be amongst the crazy people who simply do what's necessary. Thank you.
So thank you for giving us the time for this interview. You just had your keynote speech out there, and it was definitely very inspiring to everybody in the room. Could you please tell me some more about what Urgenda does, just for our viewers?
Urgenda likes to speed up the energy transition, so we want to move to 100% renewables in 2030 and not in 2050. Yeah. And we do this in many different ways. 80-90% of our work is on solutions, but most people know us because we have won a climate case against the Dutch government. But most of our activities are oriented on showing that things are already possible and already put them into practice too. So a kind of entrepreneurial NGO.
Yeah, because the IPCC, all those organizations, they're all aiming at 2050. And you were talking about the sea level rise in the Netherlands. Could you describe what you mentioned earlier about how soon it's going to happen, that most people are not expecting what's actually going to happen?
Because we emit so many greenhouse gases, you see that the temperatures in the world are already rising, and 90% of all heat is trapped into the ocean, and the ocean also goes into the big ice parts of Greenland and the South Pole, and then it's melting much quicker than expected. So 10 years ago in the Netherlands they thought that the sea level rise would be this century, worst case scenario, 1.20 meters, and now the worst case scenario 10 years later is 2.5 meters to 3 meters. And actually we are not ready for 2.5 to 3. So we hope, of course, that the worst case is not happening, but if it goes so much faster within 10 years, I think in the next 10 years we will find out that it goes even faster than that. So the Netherlands should look around whether we can stay where we are or ask all countries in the world to act much quicker. And therefore you should give I think, the example yourself. And we are now one of the laggards, and that's why I am trying to speed up the Netherlands, because if we are not doing enough, how can we ask other big countries to do more?
Yeah, because this change, of course, is difficult, and part of the difficulty here is that our system is very inflexible, the political system, the scientific system. One of the issues perhaps is that the scientists are still a bit too conservative and that the politicians don't take them seriously enough. Where would you say are the biggest issues that need most fixing? Like how would you prioritize that?
Well, we are moving now, and we're moving in the right direction. So since the Paris Agreement, we have said, well, we want the temperatures not to rise beyond 1.5 degrees compared to 1850, or at least not above 2 degrees. But we're still heading at the moment for 3 to 4. So we're not on the right track yet, and I think the problem is not of one actor. I think most people still think it's not that urgent, or if it would be that urgent, then the government would do more, wouldn't they? And the government thinks, okay, I want to get to the next election, so let's put it to the next government.
Short-term thinking.
Yeah, but you do see a lot of new inventions coming up. You see a lot of upscaling in the Netherlands, people who take solar panels on the roof. Electric driving is speeding up. So you see it moving in the right direction. It starts to be a bit more exponential, which I like very much. So we can still make it, but I think we maybe need a few big events, like maybe a dike that doesn't hold, or a big, extremely big storm, or whatsoever, and then we start thinking, maybe it's worse.
Yeah, it's closer than we think.
Yeah, at the moment, if you look in Australia, those enormous fires, and that the firefighters started to talk to their government and say, we have said this before, and now we talk louder. This is an emergency, and this is caused by climate change. Please start to act. Well, when the people in your country start to ask government to act, you see all those young people, more than 1 million on the streets. Well, this will add up, and at a certain point, governments can't look away anymore, and they have to act. And it will be too late in the sense that we will have changes, but it can be a lot worse. So I hope that they will start to act soon.
You were mentioning how the Netherlands is one of the highest polluters per person per capita, but the Netherlands as a country, we're the second biggest producer of food and other things for other countries. Is it fair to compare, let's say, the Netherlands, who feed, let's say, China and many other European countries by, for example, the number of citizens or how big our land is compared to the others?
Well, you can look at it in many different ways, but the thing is that we are emitting a lot and that we're not doing much to solve the problem, because for everything that we do, there's also a more sustainable solution. So we can have greenhouses on deep geothermal energy instead of on gas, which we use currently. And gas has a problem, it creates CO2. So for everything that we do, there is a sustainable solution, and we don't feel the heat enough. We like saying, well, it's a problem of China, or it's a problem of someone else, it's Trump, it's always someone else, and never yourself. And I think we should start to act ourselves, because we cannot ask from the rest of the world to act quicker if we are the laggard of Europe.
So before the next question, I want to very quickly clarify something. In the Netherlands, when it comes to nitrous oxide pollution, there was a governmental document that basically allowed business as usual to continue, that anyone could emit as much as you want, because in the future there will be very efficient technologies that will absorb it all, which is obviously bullshit. And when a part of the government agreed that that's bullshit and immediately canceled it, suddenly the agriculture and the construction sectors couldn't get the permits that they need to continue their daily operations, and that caused a lot of chaos in our country.
And so, for example, in the Netherlands right now, because of all the stikstofmonoxide, what's it called in English? Nitrogen, thank you. The nitrogen oxides, because of the court case, now all the farmers are not allowed to produce more. Construction is stopped nationwide. What do you think about what has happened? It seems kind of like a bit of a problem right now. How should you solve that? Is it the right approach to say stop everything right now?
Well, this is exactly the thing that our government does wrong. They don't act in time, because this was known for years. And for 10 years in a row, most specialists have said, we have a problem here, let's solve it. And our government waits until the very, very last judge says, you really have to change. And then they start emergency. Well, the emergency was already there. And apparently it's necessary that the court forces our government before they start to do something. And I don't like that, but the problem is not as big as they say, because now we drive 130 miles an hour, or kilometers an hour, and we have to go back to 100. What's the problem? Let's drive 100 until half of our cars are electric, and then you can go back to 130. If that's your biggest problem in the world.
Thank you so much for your time. It was very interesting to hear you talk today.
Thank you.
So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did and think more people should see this, then please give this video a thumbs up. In case you haven't, please subscribe to our channel, because that's how you get to see videos like these before anybody else does. Other than that, I wish you guys a pleasant day, and till next time. See ya.